Your Name, or Kimi no Na wa if you're a degenerate weeb, is a movie that exists. I think like 1 out of every 7 people in Japan saw it or something. It got praised so much the director actively told people to stop praising it. Seems like a bit of a small-time cult classic to me. Oh yeah, I also hate this movie with a passion. I like anime quite a bit more than your average guy. Not enough to buy a Sagari body pillow though. Yet. But even though I'm a garbage anime-loving cringe person, this movie is one I refuse to stan. However, I do realize that I'm a tad bit of a contrarian here. Okay, a lot of a contrarian. For some reason, this movie has received acclaim from both critics and audiences alike, who will actively bend over backwards to justify some of the movie's shortcomings. And trust me, it has many, many shortcomings. Here's the IMDb plot synopsis. I will admit that I actually enjoyed my first time watching Your Name quite a bit. I mean, I didn't love it or anything, but I also didn't think it was that bad. It's easy to get sucked into the somewhat tragic story it presents to you, and as long as you don't stop to question the nonsensical story, the numerous gaping plot holes, the bland characters, the out-of-nowhere romance between the two main characters, you know, all that, it can actually be a fairly enjoyable first watch. But after my first viewing came to an end, something just didn't sit right with me. Well, at first I told one of my friends that I thought the movie was decent, I guess. The more and more I thunked on it, the more I realized how broken it truly is. Like an old building fit to collapse at the slightest gust of wind, Your Name stands on stilts as it barely manages to stay upright. The movie is built around a single plot twist, and therein lies one of the major problems. The big twist of Your Name is the cornerstone of the entire plot, and because of that, if that singular twist isn't executed perfectly, the entire movie begins to fall apart. So how was it? Well, to describe it in 2 words, not good. Before I tear this movie to shreds, I will give Your Name praise regarding 2 things: animation and emotional weight. Despite how atrocious I think the plot of the film is, the writers did do one thing right. They managed to make a film that just kinda caressed you in the feels. It made my empty and rotting soul actually feel something aside from existential dread, so props to the movie for that. And I think the animation speaks for itself. While I may be looking at a Google Doc right now as I'm scripting this, I imagine the visuals for this video will be mostly, you know, from the movie. So I think you can get a fairly good idea of just how well animated this movie is. Those are the only 2 things I will ever praise Your Name on. The rest of the movie is weeaboo trash. Alright, I've been beating around the bush explaining what Your Name actually is, so let me just say it outright. Your Name is essentially the weirdest body-switching romance ever. I'll get into why I put romance in quotes in a little bit. Our main protagonist is Taki, not the chip brand, though he's about as brainless as an empty chip bag. Taki one day begins randomly switching bodies with a girl named Mitsuha. So basically, while Taki is in Mitsuha's body, Mitsuha is in Taki's body. The first thing Taki does in Mitsuha's body is, I guess it's understandable the first time Taki switches bodies for him to do this, because at this stage he thinks this whole body switching thing is a hyper-realistic dream. But just note that even after Taki figures out that he's for realsies switching bodies, he still does this every single time they switch without once questioning the moral implications of it. Guess he was desperate. Taki and Mitsuha switch bodies back and forth for about a month. Every time they sleep at night, they wake up in the other's body. Obviously that begs the question, what if Taki doesn't sleep at night so he can continue to experience the heavenly sensation that is being a trap? I would go on a tangent about this, but I've decided not to, as this is the most minor plot hole of the entire film. It only gets worse from here. Much, much worse. Also, while this review will mostly be covering the plot, I want to rag on the characters a bit here. Taki and Mitsuha, or as I like to call them, cardboard cutout and slightly more feminine cardboard cutout, are just boring characters all around. It's kinda sad that they ended up as boring as they did because these two did have potential, but ended up feeling underdeveloped as the first act decided to focus its attention on a pointless relationship arc rather than actually develop the two main characters. So instead of the two mains feeling like friends, they actually come off more like they despise each other, considering there is a literal montage of them getting mad at each other. And by the way, this montage is pretty much the only part of the first act where they actually communicate with each other. So congrats. These two characters definitely feel like friends, don't they? Back to the plot now. If I'm completely honest with myself, the first act of this movie is actually pretty decent. That is, when it's judged by its own merits. This act gets retroactively destroyed by a little plot twist in the latter half of the movie. We'll get to that. After a month of switching between bodies and slowly getting to kind of know Mitsuha, but not really, the switching randomly stops. Desperate to slay that poon once more, Taki tries to find her IRL. Okay, let's review the information that Taki has about where Mitsuha lives. So, somehow, he never managed to find out the name of the town he spent the better part of a month living in. That's right, this town where Mitsuha lives is the only one where somehow nobody even mentions the name of the town in passing. Not only that, but he doesn't even know the rough area of Japan the town is located in. I can kind of accept the name of the town itself not being mentioned, but I refuse to believe nobody mentioned any neighboring towns or even the name of the nearby mountain range. Also, Taki during the switches has access to Mitsuha's phone. Are you telling me he never looked at the GPS? Maybe he was too busy looking through camera roll for nudes. So with how little information he has, Taki, IQ count in the thousands right here, decides the best course of action is to find the town via a sketch he drew up on a piece of notebook paper from memory of a mountain range near town. So, theoretically, he could find the mountain range and then pinpoint the town relative to it. What? You'd think it would be better to also sketch out other locations from the town, or the layout of it, or the name of some of the local businesses in said town, but no. This singular mountain range is all Taki has to go off of. Albert Einstein has some competition here. Taki decides to rope two of his friends along with him on his journey to get laid. Both of his friends justifiably believe he's gone insane, as Taki isn't smart enough to get a girlfriend, but for some reason they don't take him to a mental hospital. Conveniently, a random dude at a cafe they visit recognizes the landscape depicted in Taki's sketch. He claims that the town was called Itomori, and had been destroyed by a comet 3 years prior. All the town's residents are dead, including Taki's one and only E-Grill. Okay, we have a lot to unpack here. So, to clarify, this is the big twist of the movie, and it's honestly an experience that made me short of breath when I first saw it. This plot twist, in the moment, is amazing, because seemingly the only thing this movie can do right is emotional weight. But when you stop and think about what this twist means in the context of the story, which the movie does not want you to do, as any observation of the plot of this movie kneecaps it, you soon realize that this twist hella dumb. You see, if the comet destroying Itomori happened 3 years ago, and by extension, Mitsuha's death, then that means that Taki was switching bodies with her from 3 years in the future. This is an interesting concept until you realize that if Taki had simply looked at a calendar while in Itomori, he would have realized that all of them were 3 years behind. Okay, but what if he didn't look at a calendar? A massive stretch, but a possibility nonetheless. That doesn't work either. Something I kinda grazed over earlier is that Taki and Mitsuha were able to communicate by keeping a diary on a notepad application on each other's phones. However, these phones always display the date and time. I refuse to believe Taki never checked the date on Mitsuha's phone even once. Also, the fact that Mitsuha and Taki both have phones opens up a whole nother can of worms. Why didn't they try to FaceTime or text each other? Why didn't they ever try to add each other on social medias? Maybe it isn't just Taki who's mentally handicapped, but Mitsuha as well. After coming to the startling realization that his gamer girl is dead, Taki orders his two friends to go back to Tokyo while he carries on alone. He travels to the gaping crater where Itomori used to stand, and then to the town shrine where he finds 3-year-old fermented sake that Mitsuha created. Okay, so quick explanation here. Kuchikamizaki, or spit-made sake, is created by chewing on rice, then spitting it back into a cup and letting it sit. The reason why Taki knows the Kuchikamizaki is in the shrine is because he witnessed half of a journey to the shrine where he was supposed to put it as an offering to the gods or whatever. He knows for a fact that Mitsuha made this with her own spit. Taki decides the best thing to do once he sees Mitsuha's sake is to drink it. Drink 3-year-old gamer girl spit mixed with Asia's finest. Welcome to Cafe Itomori. And you thought incel culture was bad now. Has anyone in r/incels done this? The bowl is moldy, for God's sake. Well, as it turns out, the bowl had deadly viruses on it, so Taki contracts osteoporosis and dies. Movie over. I wish. And just like that, Taki is in Mitsuha's body again. How? Why? I give up. And with that, the third act begins. You may think that because we're in the third act that the review's almost over, but take a closer look at that timestamp, buddy. Taki climbs out of bed, but gets stopped by Mitsuha's grandmother, who out of nowhere has the clairvoyance to know that the person who's in Mitsuha's body is not really Mitsuha, but rather a spicy chip brand. Now, some of you hardcore Your Name fans may be thinking, actually, Mitsuha's grandmother figured that out back during the visit to the shrine. But that was in a different timeline, so it doesn't count. Didn't happen. The reason her grandmother knows Mitsuha is not actually Mitsuha is because possession runs in her family, and Mitsuha's grandmother has experienced body switching herself. But why is it now that she realizes that Mitsuha has been possessed? Why not, I don't know, back at the very first body switch when Taki managed to make a complete ass out of himself in Mitsuha's body? Oh, and he also committed egregious acts of self-love in front of Mitsuha's sister. Pretty much the equivalent of invoking Satan himself in that very room. It sure is awfully convenient that now is the moment that Mitsuha's grandmother figures it out.
For all you stargazers out there, the comet Tiamat has been visible to the naked eye for about a week now. Tonight, it will finally reach its perigee around 7:40 p.m. and be at its maximum brightness when viewed from the Earth's
It's
surface.
tonight. There's still time left.
We've reached the final countdown, lads. It's time to save Itomori from that comet. Taki decides to proclaim to two of Mitsuha's friends that he is Jesus, the Son of God, risen to smite the unholy. Just kidding, Taki's a trap, and traps are gay. You know what that means. God hates gay people, and therefore hates Taki. He manages to get these two liberals on board to help save the town, and together they hatch a brilliant scheme. It's an incredibly simple, easy to execute plan. All they have to do is set up explosives without being seen to knock out the power in Itomori. How a bunch of high school students obtain explosives is never explained. Then Sayaka will hack into the emergency broadcast system and tell everyone to GTFO away from everywhere that isn't the school where the comet is supposed to hit. This plan also hinges on convincing the town mayor to go along with it, as he could cancel the whole thing in an instant if he wanted to. I don't see what could possibly go wrong here. As it turns out, proclaiming in front of the town mayor that you somehow switched bodies with his soon-to-be-dead daughter from the future and have the epic quirk of knowing that a comet is going to strike the town, well, it's a miracle he wasn't put under anesthetics and sent to a mental facility. R.I.P. Itomori, guess you're boned, cause that mayor ain't getting convinced. Meanwhile, Mitsuha wakes up in a post-apocalyptic Itomori. Well, that's just cutie patootie. In case you couldn't tell by now, we're dealing with alternate timelines, the death of all good time travel media. However, it's a bit more complicated than you may think. As Taki and Mitsuha switch bodies in the first half of the movie, they are doing it on one linear timeline, just at different times in said timeline. However, when the comet kills everyone in Itomori, a second timeline is created where the town is, spoiler alert, saved by Taki and Mitsuha. However, the alternate timeline aspect of the story is the cause of most of its soon-to-be-discussed plot holes and contrivances. We'll get to that when I have the mental capacity for it, because right now I can't be bothered. Now we get to an important scene, a flashback that Mitsuha has of an event that preludes the film. As it turns out, Mitsuha decided to try and meet Taki IRL before he started switching with her. Only, unlike Taki, the complete brainlet of the two, Mitsuha actually knew what city Taki lived in, Tokyo. This is where Taki should have been taking notes. However, they still neglect the fact that social media exists, which would thusly save Mitsuha the hassle of having to take a train to Tokyo. So I don't think it's fair to claim either of them have an IQ above 60. Mitsuha manages to find Taki, but because Taki was switching bodies with Mitsuha from the future, he hadn't actually begun switching yet at the time of Mitsuha meeting him, so Taki doesn't recognize her. Mitsuha decides to give Taki the ribbon she keeps in her hair, and tie it to his wrist. And this exact moment, is where all the people defending the plot of this movie lose their minds. So, one of the main themes in Your Name is Musubi, the metaphorical force that binds us together. It's not literal, or at least it hadn't been literal up to this point. Now, this red string that Mitsuha wears in her hair is actually the red string of fate, a symbolization of Musubi, the binding force between two people, in this case Mitsuha and Taki. During the scene where Mitsuha's grandmother realizes that Mitsuha is being possessed, she tells Taki to treasure the moments he has in Mitsuha's body, because a weird quirk with this body switching biz is that the people switching places have a tendency to forget most of what happened during said switching. Mitsuha's grandmother is seemingly unable to recall who she switched with, and only knows that it did indeed happen at some point. This string right here binds Mitsuha and Taki together. It's the only reason why Taki doesn't forget who Mitsuha is. Excuse me, how does that work? My problem here isn't with this plot point itself, it's with how poorly set up it is. The audience is never explicitly told that the reason why Taki and Mitsuha are remembering their experiences together is because a symbolization of a religious belief suddenly and inexplicably has actual bearing in the real world now. This entire plot point flew over my head while watching the film because of how abhorrently set up it is. R/whoosh, the plot makes no sense. Musubi is also used to explain why Gamer Girl Spit is able to take Taki into another timeline. Only, Musubi is a metaphor. It doesn't affect reality. Or at least it didn't before the movie decided that actually it does, because script. Looking deeper at Your Name, the reason why the screenwriters chose to use Musubi this way becomes blatantly obvious. They wanted the movie to seem deep. This is what I like to call us syndrome, where, in an attempt to make it look like the movie has more depth than it actually does, the screenwriters decide to stuff the movie full of symbolism that has to be interpreted in a particular way for the movie's plot to even make sense. Your Name seems so blatantly pretentious to me when it's spelled out like this. It makes the critics have to decode the movie's plot like it's a cicada puzzle, and while they're doing the screenwriters' jobs for them, they'll sing praises about how deep the movie is. So now that I've established why using metaphors as plot is bad, you'd think I'd be able to move on from this scene. Nope. Plot hole number I've lost count at this point. If the reason why Mitsuha and Taki remembered the body switches is because of the Yarn of Fate, then how does Mitsuha remember the switches long enough to give Taki the yarn in the first place? Taki and Mitsuha aren't bound together until she gives him the yarn, so there's no way she should have been able to remember Taki's existence. So, after discussing this plot hole, now we can move on from this scene. Right? 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 Nope. Think again. The spiral goes even deeper. For starters, the reason why Taki and Mitsuha's Musubi link is never severed is because he starts wearing the ribbon Mitsuha gave him as a good luck charm. Excuse me? This absolute madman, after being given a ribbon from someone who is a complete stranger to him at the time of receiving it, decides to wear it for 3 years straight. Also, later in the film, Taki takes off the string, then proceeds to immediately forget who Mitsuha is. This means he had to have kept it on all 3 years in the shower and on the toilet. Bruh. Except, no actually, because he is seen putting on the ribbon in the morning in this scene. So, there's a buffer time after taking off the yarn, right? But then why does Taki conveniently forget here immediately after taking off the string? Hippity hoppity, this movie has no logic. So if Taki keeps this ribbon from a complete stranger, she must have especially stuck out to him, right? Except Taki doesn't remember Mitsuha upon switching into her body. Fuck it. I'm moving to Itamori. Here's to hoping the comet strikes me down and I don't have to suffer through this abomination of a film anymore. Okay, where were we? Right, the town mayor. Even with the mayor, quite logically, giving them the thumbs down for their nuclear car fire of a plan, Taki and the gang decide to keep chugging along with it. This is when Taki realizes something epic. He rationalizes that since he switched into Mitsuha's body to get into the new timeline, that means Mitsuha should be at the shrine in his own body. The thought of cucking himself was too much to bear, so he races up the mountain in search of his own penis. Only, isn't Mitsuha 3 years in the future? And in an alternate timeline? Wouldn't it be pointless to search for Mitsuha? Here's where the movie does yet another metaphor into reality. Earlier on, it's stated by some random that, quote, twilight is when the world blurs and one might encounter something supernatural. Cool metaphor, right? Well, that's about to get destroyed. When Taki reaches the top of the mountain, he can't see Mitsuha because they're, 3 years apart and in separate timelines. However, because twilight is when the world blurs, the second it turns twilight, all of a sudden they can see each other. I don't think I need to tell you how idiotic this is. Some clunky dialogue and then they switch one last time, seemingly bringing both of them back to their own timelines, but not before writing their names on each other's hands so they don't forget each other. Mitsuha, this time actually as Mitsuha, runs down the mountain, but begins to forget Taki's name because the absolute gaming legend took the red yarn off his wrist, thusly killing Masubi to death. Mitsuha looks at her wrist to try and remember Taki's name and,
Even the way that you love.
They were in love? I know I've been joking this whole review that Taki just wants to sex Mitsuha, but that was just a joke. No one could have possibly expected these two people who have barely talked to be seriously in love. This is the very moment that destroys the first act for me. The point of the first act of Your Name is to set up the characters and their motivations, but all the first act shows them do is argue with each other because they're both unintentionally ruining each other's lives. You mean to tell me that these guys were in love? Sorry, forgive me for not noticing the brilliantly subtle romance here. Now, you could say that Taki's obsession with the Itamori case is enough to suggest a romantic interest. But really, I think anyone would do similar if they had inexplicably swapped bodies with another person across time. I mean, that's what I thought while watching the film. But nope, they were in love, apparently. I'm bored, so let's just wrap this up. Mitsuha saves the town, but she forgets who Taki was. Meanwhile, Taki, presumably in his own timeline, has also forgotten Mitsuha and their switches. However, they both have this sort of empty feeling that they're missing something or someone. Taki recalls being obsessed with Itamori for a small period of time, but doesn't remember why. But wait, if Mitsuha's grandmother remembers that she can switch bodies, why don't Taki and Mitsuha? And then...
Excuse me! Have I met you somewhere?
I thought so too.
Can I ask you your name?
Oh, come on! They meet each other at a staircase and have their happy ending. Only they broke all laws of everything to do so. This is gonna get pretty confusing, so bear with me for a bit. There's a lot of alternate timeline shit going on. So, when Taki at the shrine switches into the alternate timeline, Mitsuha from the second timeline is brought into the first. Taki 1 and Mitsuha 2, if you will. Mitsuha 1 is dead, killed by the comet that struck Itomori. Taki 1 is in Mitsuha 2's body, vice versa for Mitsuha 2, and Taki 2 is at home, soon to watch a television broadcast about the comet. So that means that at the mountain, when Taki 1 and Mitsuha 2 switch, Taki 1 is returned to the first timeline, and Mitsuha 2 is returned to hers. Supposedly. But then Mitsuha 2 and a Taki meet up. This should be Taki 2 if we're going by the logic I presented earlier. But here's the thing, Taki 2 remembers events from Taki 1's life, namely the search for Itomori. What? So here's a little something. Taki 2 still switched with Mitsuha 2. This is evident from the fact that Mitsuha 2 knows who Taki is. Okay, so maybe Taki 2 also looked for Itomori. But Taki 2 would not have forgotten who Mitsuha was. Taki 2 would have seen Itomori destroyed, but all the town residents would have been saved. And he should have found out about it, resulting in him attempting to find Mitsuha elsewhere. He wouldn't have gone to Itomori's shrine to chug them e-grill juices. Which, by the way, if Taki 2 had done that, it would have resulted in an infinite time loop. So, guess your name dodged a bullet there. Anyway, Taki 2 would have never lost the red yarn, so he would have never forgotten Mitsuha like Taki 1 did. So, this is clearly Taki 1, right? But how the hell did he get into Timeline 2? And more importantly, if this is Taki 1, where is Taki 2? He's just running around Tokyo along with these two. Also, if you recall correctly, Taki 2 would have been theoretically looking for Mitsuha for 5 years straight. He should have found her by now. Or maybe he just doesn't exist. That's right, Taki 2 is a hoax, set up by the government. Close your eyes and rest easy, because he isn't there. Also, because Mitsuha 2 and Taki 2 are still connected by Masubi, shouldn't Mitsuha still remember who Taki is? She's clearly still wearing the ribbon as part of her regular attire. Sure, she would have been remembering Taki 2 instead of Taki 1, the Taki who she evidently meets up with here, but she would have been remembering pretty much the same person. Okay, so let's say Taki 1 and Mitsuha 2 somehow got into the same timeline. But how do they see each other? Theoretically, Taki is still 3 years in the future compared to Mitsuha 2. So when did their timelines get synced? God, this is making my brain hurt. But in the end, all this speculation is pointless, because we all knew the real answer to these questions from the start. Masubi. The ultimate way to disregard any sense of logic in a shameless attempt to cater to the critics. Your Name doesn't feel the need to justify itself because Masubi covers for their hack job script. Masubi means they can cover up all their mistakes by claiming destiny changed everything regardless of the rules imposed by the movie. And that's Your Name. Wasn't very good. In the end, while Your Name is a movie that tries to do a lot, it ends up a confusing mess that really doesn't deserve the praise it gets. I mean, the director agrees with me here. He wanted the movie to stop getting praise. Is this really someone who's proud of his work? I ask you. While Your Name tries to tell a deep and emotional story about tragedy and time travel, the blatant disregard of logical storytelling, as well as the lackluster and downright idiotic characters, holds it back. Overall, 10 out of 10 I love traps and this movie is full of them.